heard your introductions, I already feel connected with each of you. And I feel that we're somehow walking together on the same path, this path that is on our subtitle, Path of Awakening and Transformation. So, first question, well, maybe the first question that you had in mind for those of you who are meeting me for the first time is, who's this guy anyway? What does he have to offer, and where is it coming from? So I was born and raised in the Philippines in a devout Catholic family, and in my late teens I felt a calling to the religious life. Well, after some struggles with questions of meaning, the point of it all, and so on, I went to State University before that and had a scholarship in physics. So I was preparing myself for a career in nuclear physics to help my country in its scientific future. We were given incentives with scholarships and so on for that. So I was excited at leaving the household after high school and going to the big city for the university. And it was at that time when, in my first year, being away from home, I hung out at the Catholic campus of the big university campus, the Catholic chaplaincy of the university campus, where I met also university students. And we would just have fun together, singing and dancing and playing and eating together and so on during class, between classes, and attending mass at noon, where there was a usual gathering of people from all over. And somehow that drew me to some questions about the faith, because there were some college students who were 2 or 3 years ahead of me who were hanging around also with the group there, but were asking those big questions about meaning. Does God really exist? And if so, how come there's so much injustice in the world, and so on? And given all of those questions, which really struck me right from the heart, because born and raised Catholic, I had taken that fact for granted, that God does exist and God loves us all and so on. So when those questions came, I started really searching within myself. Can I really say that I am sure of my answer to these questions? So rather than doing my math homework, I spent hours in the library reading philosophy books and religious books and so on, and I felt that there was something here that I needed to know more. So it was like something that was quenching my thirst. So at the end of that first year, there was an opportunity that showed me that I could do more of that rather than doing math and physics. I met a Jesuit priest who told me about the Jesuit vocation and so on. By the way, that happened to be Helen's uncle, who was then an assistant to the provincial then, who became provincial also. And I did not know Helen until I met her here much later in the 1990s. But in any case, that was in the 60s. And so, by some dint of grace, I was able to enter the Society of Jesus. I just left my scholarship behind and did not even tell them that I was leaving. And so from that time on, I went into the Jesuit formation period, starting with the novitiate program for 2 years, and then Jesuit studies in philosophy, preparing for theology. And after 6 years of that in the Philippines, I was also then invited to go to Japan to help with the Jesuit work there. I myself felt attracted to it, and I myself in fact acted it, because somehow something struck me that if this faith is to be meaningful to anybody, it must also make sense to people who are now living in a very, what I thought then was a secularized society with its modernization and so forth, getting upwards in the economic scale and so on. So I felt there was a call to witness to the faith in a place like Japan. So when I arrived in Japan, the first task for us was to learn the language and culture of Japan. So at that time, my Jesuit spiritual director was Father Thomas Hand, who was already practicing Zen under a Japanese Buddhist master. This was all in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council that encouraged Christians, Catholics specifically, to explore all that is good and holy in other traditions, with the conviction that everything that is good and holy in this world comes from the same creator of all that is good and holy, namely the God that Christians recognize as the Father of Jesus Christ, who also sends the Holy Spirit and breathes life to us all. So with that worldview, my mission then that I was given as a mandate in Japan was to study about the Japanese religions and spiritualities that were there, that were vivifying Japanese culture and Japanese society in a way that the Catholic Church, a very small minority, less than 1% of the then 100 million Japanese population, could be able to dialogue and interact and work constructively with the rest of the culture. So with that, I gladly did my graduate studies in Buddhism at the State University of Tokyo. And at the same time, I also began Zen practice with the encouragement of my spiritual director. So when I encountered Zen, somehow it felt very familiar in that the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which had been our bread and butter in terms of spiritual path and spiritual practice since entering the Jesuits, somehow had prepared me for that kind of world that the Zen practice had opened for me. And I'll tell you more about that later. So for me, these two paths of spiritual practice, the spiritual exercises, which I began when I was a young Jesuit and continued after a 30-day retreat in during the first 2 years of the Vichy, our Jesuit way of life called us to have at least 8 days a year for the spiritual exercises. We would be given the opportunity to go off to another place, a retreat house, or to go to a place different from where we were studying, to just be able to continue and deepen our immersion in the spiritual exercises according to the spirit of Ignatius of Loyola. So with that as my background, when I came to Japan and began Zen, somehow something clicked that I was already familiar with what Zen was offering, and Zen was giving it to people in a very direct way. Ignatius was a very methodical, analytical person who gives guidance to individuals who are beginning to ask the big questions in life and who seek guidance in a spiritual path in a very methodical way with very precise pointers and notes, which we will look at as we go along. And then he gives different steps toward deepening in the spiritual path from a stage of purification to a stage of illumination and to a stage of union. And so with that process already as something I was familiar with when I began practicing Zen, somehow I felt an invitation to go direct to the heart of what the Ignatian exercises was all about, namely the contemplation on the fact that we are all suffused with divine love. If you ask me what the key or the gist or the kernel of the exercises or of undergoing the exercises is all about, really, there are no words to exhaust it, but there are 4 words that come to mind that somehow hit at the core of that, which my Zen practice also brought home to me. Not in the same way, but at least the same experience, namely the words that Jesus heard when he was baptized in the Jordan. You are my beloved. That experience of being beloved in an infinite and unconditional way. And somehow that realization gives one that empowerment to really live life now with a new realization that there's something worth it, because this love that I am loved with and loved by is something that I can also share with others, and that's really the good news, the fact that we are all beloved. And so Ignatius goes through that with the different steps with this analytic mind and very methodical process, using scriptural text and very discursive processes. But Zen just says, don't just do something, sit there. And in sitting there, somehow, if one's mind is open, and if one follows those instructions of setting aside one's thoughts and one's analytic enterprises, somehow in that stillness, something happens. And that something that can happen is so transformative and is so life-giving in its own way, without using so many words, without even taking the word God as a necessity or as a condition for experiencing it. And so with that, somehow I needed to sort that out. What is this now? So fortunately, I was given the theological aid, or rather the help from the theological studies that I then also was scheduled to undergo in preparation for ordination to the priesthood. So my theological studies involved really a way of sorting out what all of these Christian words meant in terms of the experiences I was beginning to really taste more and more deeply and appreciate more and more fully in my life, and to see what these really meant, not just to see them as doctrines that are to be believed, but as messages to each of us human beings that can really change our lives. So with that, well, I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to find the right form or the appropriate way of God talk, of theology, to be able to express that. And for me, that has become a lifelong task. So fast forward so many things that happened. 1989, I faced major crossroads in my life, which led me to ask for dispensation from my belonging to the Society of Jesus. And with that, I started looking for the next place, not knowing where I would be going. So after a retreat that I underwent, going back to the Philippines, my home country, to really see whether this step was something that I could be at peace with. And somehow when it fell in place and I felt that this was a new call that I was receiving for my life, a letter from the Dean of Perkins School of Theology came, then Dean James Kirby, inviting me to come over to Perkins and start teaching a course that Dr. Neil McFarland had been teaching for many years, and he had just retired, and so they needed somebody to take over what he had been doing. So I was so fortunate in being asked to do so, and that's where I've been, and they've been stuck with me since then. And I'm really so blessed in doing what I am doing at Perkins, and also in sharing the kinds of gifts that I also was already doing when I was teaching at Sophia University in Japan, and also as I was also offering retreats in the Zen and Ignatian format already in Japan as a Jesuit in service. So now I am a lay parishioner at Holy Trinity Catholic Church, and I also sit with the group here at Maria Cannon Zen Center and walk with people who are also on this path of awakening and transformation, and share with them whatever I may have learned in the process, and I learn from them also, and so it's been a blessed path all along. So this is what enables me to share some of those nuggets that I found along the way. And so somehow when the opportunity came for me to try to integrate these thoughts, these have been in the back burner, by the way, for more than 15 years now. The tapes of a retreat I had offered in conjunction with a sister of the Religious of Good Shepherd, Sister Rosario Batung, whom I mentioned in the acknowledgements, was given to a group of seminarians about to be ordained to the Roman Catholic priesthood. sometime in the 1980s in the Philippines. And so that month-long retreat, spiritual exercises, Zen style, gave me the opportunity to merge those two approaches to the spiritual path and offer guidelines to others in that direction. And so the kernel, or rather, well, the content of those talks were transcribed, and as I reread the transcriptions, somehow it came to me that there's something that could be offered now at this time. So that's what resulted in this book that is now published by Orbis just this October. So I am hoping that it is something that can be an invitation for people who are seeking a spiritual path, who may already be in a religious community like Christian community, Catholics, or Christians of different denominations, or those who are not really particularly committed to any Christian community or Christian doctrine, but are open to seeking, and I see a good number of you here also, or open to at least hearing Christian words and see what they might say to you, not so much for their doctrine, but mainly for the experiential content that they can bring to us in a way that enables the awakening and the transformation to happen. And so I'm so glad to hear the introductions of each one of you, knowing that there's that openness of heart that already is indicated in the way you came and presented yourselves here. So I really feel, as I said, a sense of affinity with each and every one of you already as we begin at this point. And I look forward to getting to know each one of you deeper, and hope that also each one of you will also get to know little groups, through little groups, breakout groups that we'll be having, and be able to share the gifts that you already bring as we meet and our paths intersect through this lecture series. So now, where do we begin? Spiritual exercises, the origins. Where does that term come from? Well, let's take Ignatius in the way he defines it. In that little booklet that Ignatius wrote after he had himself undergone a very rigorous and arduous process of transformation from the ambitious, self-centered, vainglorious young man that he was to a very, very deeply spiritual person. And when he wrote down the notes as to how, what he underwent and how he might be able to guide others in it, spiritual exercises, he writes in the very initial set of notes, spiritual exercises are this, and this is what he writes in English translation. Spiritual exercises.
What page you know?
Page 24.
Thank you.
Of this book. You're welcome. Indicates every way of examining one's conscience, of meditating, contemplating, of praying vocally and mentally, and other spiritual activities, as will be explained later. For just as strolling, walking, and running are exercises for the body, so spiritual exercises is a name given to every way of preparing and making ourselves ready to get rid of all disordered affections, so that, once rid of them, one might seek and find the divine will in regard to the disposition of one's life for the salvation of one's soul. Big words there. But let me note already, right at the start, that that way that Ignatius defines spiritual exercises presupposes a very sharp or clear distinction between the realm of the spirit and the realm of the body. He talks about the spirit in the way he just did, and then he says, oh, that's different from the things we do with the body, like walking, running, calisthenics, and so on. And that seems to be something that many of our contemporary thinkers and artists and cultural contemporaries find problematic, because that presupposes a dualism of the body and spirit, or body and mind, that runs through a lot of Western culture, the Greek influence and then medieval European Christian influence also has that sense of a dualism of spirit and body. How do we address that? Can we still take these spiritual exercises on, given that it starts with that very dualistic presupposition? Well, I would like to recast that term spirit or spiritual in terms that our contemporaries are more able to see it. And I'm sure that Father Ignatius will agree. If he is there listening to us, he'll say, okay, you have a point, go right ahead. Sometimes I check in with him and I see him giving me a wink and say, okay, go right ahead. I wouldn't have said it that way, but it's okay. Anyway, it may be presumptuous of me to say that, but somehow I feel assured.
Was he Spanish or Italian?
Yes, he's Spanish. Basque, to be sure. Some Basque would say, no, he's not Spanish, he's Basque. But, yes. Anyway, we'll talk about his life briefly. But the main thing is that now the word spiritual is what we would like to focus on in a way that overcomes this dualism between body and spirit. Is there such a way? Well, I'd like to refer us to a series of books, 22, in fact, I believe, if not 23, with the general heading of World Spiritualities. And each book deals with a specific religious tradition. The Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Muslim, even secular spirituality, Sikh spirituality, and so on. Everything that could be covered under that heading, spirituality, taking the extant traditions, indigenous spiritualities, Native American, Mesoamerican, and so on, are included in this whole series, one or two books each. And there's a general preface that begins, or rather that's on the front area of each volume. It was written by a theologian from Fordham University, Dr. Ewart Cousins, whom I had the privilege of knowing before he passed away. But he takes the word spiritual, asking, what do these different religious traditions have in common in their use of the term spiritual? And he says this, and just to paraphrase, spiritual refers to the core of our being, that innermost core wherein we are able to meet the transcendent. So he recast the term spiritual from that dualistic mind-body format or framework to one where the spiritual is something that refers to the core, the very core of who we are as human beings. And if we really come home to that core, that is where we become open to that which is beyond us, really, the transcendent dimension. That underlies everything that we are. So I'm kind of supplementing it with some other notions here, but that core of our being is the spiritual core, the spiritual in us. And I would like to add to what Dr. Cousins writes in that preface, in addition to the place where we meet the transcendent, it is also the place, the location in us, where we meet everyone else, where we meet one another. So there is a vertical opening, the opening to the transcendent. And then there is also the horizontal opening, the opening to all beings. And so someone who arrives at the core of our being, someone who is able to come home to your own center, is not only open to the horizon of the transcendent, the holy other, but is also open to everyone else as sharing in that same holy presence. In other words, citing St. Augustine of Hippo, that which is most intimate to us, more intimate to us than we are to ourselves, where we find the holy, is also beyond anything we can ever imagine. It is also beyond all our thoughts, beyond all our words, beyond all our imagination, the transcendent, the Holy One, but who meets us and whom we are able to meet in the innermost core of our being. And that meeting with that Holy One also enables us to meet one another, because we are centered in the same place. So to be a spiritual person then, with this understanding, is one who is in touch with one's center. To be there where one is centered and one lives one's life out of one's center, rather than someone who lives separate from the body or lives in a spiritual plane that is not bodily and so on. Not that kind of dualistic way of using it, but a way of using the term spiritual that refers to the core of our being, where we are open to one another, where we are open to the holy in our lives, and where we are also at home. And that is really a place we'd all like to be. We'd all like to be home. Like right now, in another hour or so, we'll be home, hopefully. But hopefully we can be at home anywhere we are. And that's what being a spiritual person is called to be. And if you are at home with yourself and at home with the universe, it's a strange thing, but people also find themselves at home with you. A person who is at peace with oneself, a person who is at home in what one is and does not have to have any issues of trying to prove oneself better than anybody else and so on. But you're at home, you're accepting of yourself, and you are truly living your full self from the core of your being. Somehow that attracts everyone else. And that's what attracts so many people to those whom we really can call truly spiritual persons. Like somebody like, well, currently Pope Francis stands out as a very inspiring example of someone who is like that. And so many individuals in history and in our current community, named or unnamed. Somebody whom we can really associate with and hang out with a little bit, and you know that that person's at peace with oneself. And we find ourselves naturally drawn to such persons. And so in meeting such persons, we feel, I want to be like that. Or sometimes you also can say, I'm so glad to be alive because there's such a person as this, and I'd like to be like that too. So now the question we'd like to ask is, how can we be someone like that? Maybe we already are, and yet that doesn't mean that we stop there and just rest on our laurels and just coast. But somehow life is an ongoing journey, and so there are many twists and turns, and we go through this very precarious and very exciting journey of life, and we can always fall by the wayside, we can always be sidetracked and so on. So the question of coming back home is always something before us. How can we keep coming back home and really finding that place where we are open to the holy and open to one another? How to live that kind of life. And so that's where spiritual practice, spiritual exercises comes in. So this is what I understand you're all interested in developing, seeking, furthering, enhancing in your own life. That kind of spiritual exercise that enables us to continue coming back home and there to awaken and be transformed. So what can we say then? What kind of practices are so-called spiritual practices or spiritual exercises? Again, there are many things we can refer to in that regard. If you look at the history of religions, there have been so many different kinds of practices in the different traditions, and of course, indigenous traditions have their spiritual practices of just going out in nature, the so-called, well, I don't exactly know how you call them, but they go out into the wilderness and just expose themselves to the elements, and in so doing, somehow there is something that strikes them, a holy presence, a holy experience in those traditions. Now, if we look at the Hindu tradition, one of the oldest traditions also, they have formed a very disciplined and very methodical set of exercises known under the generic term of yoga. Now, yoga has been transmitted in the West under one specific form called Hatha Yoga, which involves bodily exercises, twisting your body like a pretzel and so on. Or, sorry for the caricature, but for those of you maybe doing yoga, didn't mean to make fun of it, but it's also a way of aligning the body to the universe, to the rhythms of the universe. And the word yoga itself comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, Y-U-J, which means to unite. The English word yoke, which unites or ties the ox with the cart, the yoke that ties the ox to the cart, is that uniting point, that uniter, that unifier, the integrator. So that's yoga, the integrator of the human being with the universe, with the Brahman, the principle of transcendence in the Hindu tradition. So that which enables us to find that place of union with all is yoga. And so there are many different forms of yoga, which we won't go into, but that's one form of spiritual exercise that is already very well practiced in different locations and different contexts. Now, Shakyamuni Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama, as he was known before he became the Buddha, had the Hindu tradition in his background, and so when he came to a point where he was seeking answers to the big questions in life, after 6 years of intense search, he came to this practice that he learned from the tradition of his time, namely to just sit still, and in the tradition of yoga, with one's legs in full lotus, and in that position with his back straight and just watching his breath in stillness, something happened to him. That something which is called awakening, which made him a Buddha. And the word Buddha is simply the noun form of the verb to awaken, Bud. Awaken to what? And in that regard, well, we'll be looking at that a little more in detail. But so that kind of spiritual practice has been there since 2,500 years, for 2,500 years now in human history. And the Zen tradition is an inheritor of that form of practice in a very simplified way that has been adopted and adapted in Chinese, Korean, and Japanese cultures and now brought into the West. So that is a form of spiritual practice that we will be also referring to in the course of our lectures and in the course of our life during this lecture series. I would like to add some homework toward the end to invite everyone during the interval period of 2 weeks or sometimes 3 to take on some form of spiritual practice so that you are actually engaging in something that this lecture series is all about in your own, and then when you come and share that again and listen to the next step or other angles, you will have that kind of experience with you to be able to share and also to be able to enrich yourself. So that will be a request or a suggestion or a recommendation that I will offer with some more detail as before we finish this afternoon. Now, in that regard, there is a passage that struck me as I was reading a book by Natalie Goldberg, a very well-known author who also was a long-time Zen practitioner and continues to do so. She also teaches writing and holds seminars in writing and as well as in Zen and writing, or I don't know how she puts the connection, but she's a long-time Zen practitioner, and somehow her writing also is empowered by her own Zen practice. And in her book called Long Quiet Highway, I believe that's the title. Yes, it's Long Quiet Highway by Natalie Goldberg. She recalls an incident in her high school. She was taking an English class, I believe she was 9th grade, and she was in this English class with Mr. Clemente, the teacher. And one day it was raining, and so at that time Mr. Clemente just told the class, please set aside your books and notes and just sit there. And here's what she writes. Natalie Goldberg, in the 9th grade, talks about her teacher, Mr. Clemente, who told them to switch off the lights, or rather, who switched off the lights in the classroom and told everyone just to sit and listen to the rain outside. Just for 10 minutes. Listen to the rain. Do nothing else, but just there. Sit and listen. And she recalls later how that 10-minute period became so pivotal in her life because she got in touch with something so precious that then empowered not just her life, but also her creative life, her writing and so on. And she writes in this way. Here was Mr. Clemente who asked me to listen to the rain, to connect a sense organ to something natural, neutral, good. He asked me to become alive. I was scared and I loved it. Thank God for that rain out of the window and for Mr. Clemente, who allowed us in the 9th grade to listen to it for no reason in the middle of the day. The moment carried me a long way into my life. Natalie Goldberg. So these moments when we can just stop and be still can open to us a new horizon. So that's an invitation for us leading our very busy lives. Very good and busy and productive lives perhaps. But somehow in the midst of that we may feel something still lacking. Or maybe we still feel that although we're very successful on external grounds, on so many other levels, somehow there's still something we're needing or wanting, or somehow there's still something that needs to be filled in. What is that? And I'm sure that each one has their own angle and their own version of what is that you feel in those moments. But so here is an invitation. Just sit and be still. Now, the Buddha himself, when he was asked by those who were listening to him, he was, after his experience of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, he just naturally went out and stayed with people. And when they asked him, "Sir, how is it that you are so calm and so compassionate and so wise and so loving? Please tell us how we may be like you." And of course, those were the moments when he gave his so-called sermons that were enshrined later, memorized by those who heard them, and then were transmitted in Buddhist scriptures. But the very central summary of those words that he said to those who were listening to him is in 2 words: stop and see. In Pali and in Sanskrit, the words are shamatha, to stop the workings of your mind, and vipassana, to see clearly. So stop your mind from its grasping, from its searching, from its discursive and analytic meanderings, and just allow yourself to see. And so there is his instruction to all of those who seek to be awakened and be transformed. Stop and see. And Buddhist followers and scholars throughout generations up to now have been trying to expound that in so many words, and so we have many books and many tomes and commentaries about what is it that you actually see and how can you really stop, and so on, analyses of Buddhist styles of meditation and so on, volumes and volumes. So we just complicate matters. But for the Buddha it was simple. Just stop and see. Now Zen has taken on that tradition, and so when I was introduced to it in my early Jesuit life, somehow that gave my mind a lot of rest from having to go through those discursive exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola, because as we will see as we go through these exercises, we will also try to flex our discursive muscles a little bit by looking at some of these methodical guidelines that Ignatius provides. He sets at least 5 different points for each meditation. Okay, put yourself in the place where so you read a gospel passage or you read a biblical passage. So put yourself in that place where the passage is happening, or in the context in which it's being told. Say a prayer to God and ask God what you want out of this meditation, and then go through number 1, go through number 2, number 3, and then you reflect on it and so on. Ignatius does it in a very complicated and analytic way, and then at some point, somehow, if you follow with your analytic mind, the analytic mind then is just set aside, and then you enter into a deep experience. So Ignatius is able to use those different sides of the brain to come to that experience of union, a mystical experience, if you will. But Zen would not need to go through all of that. It just says, okay, take a posture that is very simple, with your back straight and so on. Be mindful of your breath, and let your mind be still. And in that stillness, you will know. And that, of course, resonates with what we in the Christian tradition read and recite in Psalm 46, be still and know. So that's the invitation that spiritual exercises offers to us. Simply be still and know. So with that, I was going to the life of Ignatius to show how he himself, in his own journey, underwent certain landmarks, and then compare that with the life of the Buddha. But that's something I'd like to reserve for next time. At this point, for your assignment, for your way of tasting what we are offering here as a way of connecting to the next lectures, to the next lecture in the series, that's on November 10th. I'd like to invite you to look at your own spiritual journey. If you will, if you don't already have the habit of journaling, start taking it up. Buy a notebook for yourself that you can use for your own spiritual journal. And just find some time where you can just sit quietly, either in the comforts of your room or in some place where your home is a little distracting because there are others around, like children and so on. Find some time when you can just be by yourself and just recall your life from your earliest memory and note some of those significance that stand out for you from this point of your life looking back. What were those significant moments? What were some of those encounters that really made a difference in my life? Who were the persons that were there in my life that now enable me to be who I am? Maybe we've already forgotten them, but this is an occasion to really recall them with gratitude. Or those certain events, those things that we did not foresee that happened, and yet now they are still the reason why we're where we are. It could have been some very painful event. It could have been an event that we would rather not want to remember. But maybe that painful event that happened to us was the occasion for us to go and search in a certain way, or perhaps be somehow sidetracked, but yet that was the one that enabled us to meet certain people or go to certain places without which we would not have done so, and therefore in a kind of a different way, or perhaps in a kind of an unrecognized way, they were blessings after all, although we would rather want to get them out of our memory. Some of those painful events may be also occasions for a spiritual awakening. And so just take your life and if, in that way of recollecting, and begin your own spiritual autobiography. I will not be able to go into detail into spiritual autobiography in this series, but there are courses that you can take on that. But this is also an occasion I'd like to invite everyone to take. If you feel that that's something that you will now be able to really, that will give you the ability to recapture and recover your life and really reappreciate it in a new way, you can start in these next couple of weeks. Just take maybe 15-20 minutes each time and then just begin to jot those early memories, the significant ones. And if some of them come up and really come with whatever sentiments that come up with them, my invitation is to breathe with them, breathe in and breathe out, and just appreciate them for what they have been to your life, whether they have been painful or unpleasant incidents, or whether they were memories that you really continue to cherish and so on. Just look at them from a very, how would you put it, dispassionate yet appreciative angle. I was seeing to the contrasting sentiments. Dispassionate in a way that if it's a painful memory, you don't want to get entangled into it and analyze it anymore. But also appreciative in the sense that if that had not happened to you, you would not be where you are now, for some reasons that you may not have expected. And so with that, just note down those things, and it will be an ongoing task, but see what you can come up with for yourself. You don't feel you have to show it to anybody. We're not going to ask you to show anybody, just for yourself. And if you would like to share at some point, we'll be sharing some of our autobiography next time. We will divide into small groups, as you wish, as much as you would like to share, or as much as you would like to just be open and listen to others. Nobody will be compelled to say anything that you don't feel comfortable in saying. So with that, well, that's the assignment for next time. And in addition, before I conclude, then we'll go into some logistics. Well, those of you who are already in the habit of taking time on a regular basis to sit and be still, by all means, just continue that. But for those who may just be beginning to try those exercises, just do what Mr. Clemente told the class. Wherever you are, if you're at work, let's say you have a lunch break and you have some 20 minutes or so left after your lunch, just go take a walk somewhere and just be still and watch the trees somewhere, even if it's the middle of the city. If you're, for example, near a place where, like in Baylor Hospital, there is this open area where there's a labyrinth. Go to such a place, or maybe a park near you, or maybe even in an office building where you can go to a separate room and just be quiet and just breathe in and breathe out and just listen. Take that as an initial spiritual exercise for those who are just beginning. For those who are a little more familiar with your own way of spiritual exercises, by all means continue them and allow that to then feed your own spiritual autobiography, your own recollecting of the good things and the important things in your life, whether they were so-called good or unpleasant. Recall those things in your life so that they may be more appreciated and enable us to come and appreciate where we are now with a little more gratitude. So that's the first session. I'd like to close at this point with the notion of spiritual exercise and invite everyone to already jump into some form of spiritual exercise together or on your own, and then we'll share how it goes next time, and then we'll move to the next step. Thank you.